So welcome to session 2 of climate reporting, or building your climate report. This is the third time that NetNata is running a similar number of sessions. We normally run them every 2 weeks, and they go for 5 sessions. The feedback on the first 2 times we've done this over the past year and a half is to give more examples, be more practical, try to show a bit of the end goal of what we're doing. So we've been trying to do more of that. So use existing examples, as well as bringing in partners that might have lived experiences in other areas of climate reporting that can add into this conversation. Of course, NetNata helps 100 plus clients, but we think collaboration is the way to go in this space, and technology is fantastic, but the human touch from our partners really makes this come alive. If you have any questions during the session, please let us know. If there's any resources that I'm missing, please let us know. We're here to help. We know this is hard, but it doesn't need to be overly complicated. And with the right help, we believe that everyone can get to that compliant report. So over to Sharon, which is one of our NetNata partners and works at KSIB. I'll be interrupting Sharon and asking her questions, but also if you want to ask questions, just put it in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those, and I'll let Sharon know. Awesome. Sharon, over to you.
Thanks, Afonso. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So today's session, we're going to focus very much on the assurance process that goes alongside your climate reporting. And so we've really designed the session thinking about the experience of a reporter, particularly someone with a climate reporting or just a climate background, having to go through audit for the first time. And so we've really tried to think hard and use our experiences from our other clients who are going through this right now or have been through it already, to equip you with some tips and tricks and a bit of knowledge base going into your first year of being audited on your climate report. We'll talk a bit about governance as well, but the focus of the session really is to give you like an inside peek into how auditors think and what to expect as you go through the audit process. So for those of you who do read Afonso's emails, you probably would already know about me. Thanks, Afonso, for the big up. So yes, I've spent many years of my career in a very large audit firm, PwC, and I spent a good 10 years of that working with companies who were adopting, implementing, or struggling with complex accounting standards. So I have lots of experience on implementing new accounting standards and achieving compliance in the face of complexity. I also spent about 10 years within PwC in the audit practice, where I was actually on the other side of the table critiquing external reports, helping clients make sure that their external reporting was compliant, but also, met the needs of their users. And now I am part of a firm called KSIB. We really help our clients with any forms of complexity that they might be going through. We help from a strategic perspective, but we're also very hands-on, helping our clients, manage risk, deal with new challenges that might be coming up, just like climate reporting, and really using our network of different experienced people in different functional areas to bring together teams that can help each company with your specific needs wherever you are in your journey. So we thought we would kick off today with a poll. We're going to ask 2 questions. The first one is just to gauge how many of you have actually been involved in an audit process before. And so you might have some idea of what to expect, and also whether you've managed a project before, because really going through this preparation of your first climate report and having it audited will very much feel like you're going through a project. It has a defined planning period, a sort of middle fieldwork period, and then an end period. And if you can bring good project management skills to the process, that will get you pretty far. So if you can answer the poll that's up on the screen now.
Answers are coming through. Surprisingly, a good amount of people have been involved in an audit process. I'll be super interested to know what type of audit that was. If it was a financial audit or was something more like environmental, or just maybe ISO for security. That'll be maybe a very good insight. You can pop it in the chat. We have already 100% of the answers coming through. Thank you so much. And I'll also share the results by ending the poll. Is that okay, Sharon?
Thanks, yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, great. We have a fellow auditor on the call.
Just sharing results as well, so everyone will be able to see the answers on that.
Great.
We have 42% saying they've been through the audit process before and 58% no. And then in terms of the project management, we have a 75 to 25. Super interested to understand what type of audit you've been involved in. If you can just pop it in the chat, that'll be fantastic. Over to you, Sharon.
Great. Thanks. So for those of you who have been through the audit process before, you'll probably know some of this, but by all means, also please share your experiences. That will help all of us, because this is such a new process for everybody, really. The auditing of the climate report under S2 is really very new. It's only been, 4 months of that particular type of audit going on. So all of the learnings that we can all share with each other will help everyone. I thought I'd start by I guess a little bit of a step back around why do we even have an audit process around the climate report. And the main reason is really that as soon as you have an independent party look at this report and provide formal assurance over the report, it adds credibility. And particularly in the case of climate reporting, credibility is actually super important because there's so much judgment, estimation, and like I said, this is very much an emerging methodology space. So having some independent verification really helps to build trust in your report. We also know from experience that as soon as you have an independent person, so as soon as you know you're going to have an independent person looking at your report, you're probably going to be more conscious as you're preparing that report about things like, are your systems, data quality, processes, controls all up to scratch? And so inherently, you would apply more rigor to the preparation of your report when you know it's going to be audited. So the whole process really lifts the quality and therefore the trust that you can place in the report. Right, next question. What is the role of the auditor in relation to the sustainability report?
Hopefully I set up that correctly. And you can see the correct choice. Let's see. Let's see if that works. When you mentioned the assurance adds credibility, we normally have a lot of conversations that talk about also the ambition of the reporting company. The linkage between credibility, but also the ambition, because it's easy to do the minimum viable reporting, but when you're comparing against peers, even outside the audited areas, how do you want to portray yourself? That's a really interesting and hard conversation to have with a lot of clients.
Yes.
Awesome. Answers coming through. Thank you so much. I think most of the people had the correct answer. Just a few more. All right, I'm going to end the poll here and share the results now. Perfect. So hopefully everyone can see the answers. Sharon, do you want to talk about the correct answer about the role of an auditor?
Yes. So the correct answer is to provide an independent opinion on whether the report is materially correct and prepared in accordance with S2. And so that is really the scope of the audit. as an auditor, you wouldn't also be doing the preparation generally of the report, and you also wouldn't be providing any opinion around whether the company has met sustainability targets. Of course, there are requirements to disclose sustainability targets. So if that information is disclosed, the auditor will provide an opinion over what has been disclosed, but it's not the auditor's role to make sure that those sustainability targets are met. Or maybe I'll just step back one sec just before I move on. One thing to note is that the correct answer included the word material. And so as an auditor, you are not expected to vouch for, every single thing being perfectly accurate. It's considered from the perspective of what is material to the users of the report. And so if there are material things, so things that are particularly important that are either missing or incorrect in a report, that would mean that the auditor would have to qualify their audit report and say they don't actually agree with the information that's in there. But generally, more minor things that are not considered material won't be a big issue in terms of the audit. So it's not not everything has to be exactly perfect. Quickly on this slide, I know most people will have seen this before. This is about the phasing in of reporting requirements and the phasing in of assurance requirements. So the main reason I wanted to put this up in the webinar today is to show you that in year one, the actual scope of the audit procedures is quite small. So the audit opinion will only be covering your governance disclosures, parts of your strategy disclosures, and your scope 1 and 2 emissions. Everything else is out of scope for the audit in year one. We'll come on to what else your auditor might do relating to the other areas of your report. But what I did want to flag before we move on is just that you can see that in years 2 and 3, the scope of the audit is much increased. And in year 4, the nature of the audit actually lifts to reasonable assurance as well, which is a higher standard of assurance. So what this means is, from an auditor's perspective, the amount of work that will need to be done in each of the years 1 to 4 is just going to increase every year. And so that means as soon as the effort increases, the cost is also going to increase. So just be aware of that. This is in terms of the cost of reporting. In year one, you probably have the because it's your first year of reporting, it's fairly costly because it's a new process. In year 2, you'll have the benefit of it not being the first year. However, you're going to have scope 3 coming in for the first time, which surely is also going to be adding a fair bit of effort and cost. So both your cost of preparing the report and also the cost of having it audited is actually expected to increase each year. Next thing I thought that we would just talk through is what is the difference between limited assurance and reasonable assurance? Now, limited assurance is the level of audit work that's going to be performed in years 1 to 3. In those years, the limited assurance opinion that the auditor will provide will be enough work to say that nothing has come to their attention that suggests that the information in the report is materially wrong. Whereas reasonable assurance from year 4 onwards, the auditor has to have done enough detailed testing, which includes going back to source documents, to enable them to positively conclude that the information is materially correct. So it's an affirmative confirmation for reasonable assurance. The audit opinion will say, in our opinion, the report is prepared in accordance with S2. Whereas under limited assurance, the opinion will say, nothing's come to our attention that suggests the report is materially wrong. So what that means... Yes.
Sharon, you also mentioned in our discussion something about like the naming convention, right? And how sometimes the same word gets thrown around. Can you just highlight or like double click on that?
Yes. So the use of the word assurance and the word audit are often used interchangeably, but actually, to be more precise, the reasonable assurance scope is actually really considered an audit, whereas when you do limited assurance, it's not really considered to be an audit. So you might see those words used interchangeably. There is a sort of technical difference between them. And an audit under reasonable assurance is typically the same level that you would get over your financial statements. And so if we start there, if you think about the types of procedures that an auditor would do to do a reasonable assurance or an audit engagement, the auditor would have to look at quite a fair population of the transactions that underpin your report. They would have to look at source documentation, evaluate the processes and controls that have been applied to actually prepare the report. They would need to challenge any assumptions, estimates, judgments that have been made, verify calculations. They have to do a lot of work, right, to get enough evidence together to form a positive view.
Yeah.
Whereas under limited assurance, generally the amount of work that's being performed is lower. There's a lot more inquiry, there's a lot more analytical procedures, which is more things like trend analysis or corroboration of one source of data with another source of data, alongside some what we would call targeted testing, which is detailed testing back to source documents. And we'll come back on the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about what sort of source documents we are talking about here. But the important thing to note with limited assurance is that the auditors won't be digging into every single line item, and they won't be looking to trace every single thing back to source. They'll be looking for the most important underlying documents that support the report, and they'll also be looking for red flags.
Just one thing, Sharon. Someone asked if S2 does not require first year of the report. Just to clarify, like that assurance only applies to certain levels of the report, if that's your question, not to all of the reports.
Correct. So I'll just go back one.
Sorry, Becca's mentioning S3. If you can clarify what you mean by S3, then we can maybe answer that question. Apologies, Sharon, for interrupting.
Yeah. But yes, if your question is about S2, that's 100% correct. In year one, even though the reporting requirement requires that the companies disclose all the information required under S2 except for scope 3, the audit scope is only on select sections of S2.
Thank you.
Okay. So a couple of pointers that I've picked up just from the experiences that I've had so far with some of my clients who are in the process of being audited or have been audited. One point that I just did want to bring up is there's this thing called the audit expectation gap, and it exists across all types of audit, not just financial or climate audit. Generally, the public, when looking at a report that has an independent audit report attached to it, the public can often misunderstand what an audit means and what it does, and generally or often there is over reliance placed on something that has an audit report attached to it, and this is called the expectation gap. And so, for this reason, auditors have to really care about the whole report, right? They're putting their names to your report. So even though the scope of the report is quite limited in year one, your auditors will care about the whole report. They will read the whole report. They will want to make sure that it's consistent throughout. It's not misleading in any way. And you can expect to get comments on your whole report, not just those sections that are within the scope of the audit. On the plus side, that's quite helpful because then next year, when it is all in scope, you've already hopefully streamlined and ironed out anything that the auditors might have a reaction to that is within the other bits of the report that aren't strictly speaking within the within the audit scope. We also know that greenwashing is on ASIC's surveillance radar, and they are doing a lot of work in the space. And so your auditors will be very conscious of that. They don't want to sign off on anything that actually contains any sort of misleading claims because of course, the impact on their professional reputation and potential liability. So generally speaking, you don't really want to have any information in your report that might be considered greenwashing, that might look like you're actually doing a bit of marketing for how well the company does their climate policies. Also, I've noted with some of the private companies that I've been working with, they would have a very limited number of users that would actually look at their climate report. It probably would be the auditors, maybe ASIC, maybe the banks potentially. But even for some of the private companies I've looked at, they may not have material banking facilities. So there's a very limited number of users. I did want to flag, though, that this report will remain there for some time. And so from an auditor's perspective, they would also be thinking about potential users that might use the report in the future. And that might include if there were, some M&A transaction or something that might happen in the future, the auditors will be thinking about any potential users and what the information in that report might do from a decision-making perspective in the future.
I think that's a really important point to make in terms of I feel that a lot of people are looking at the glossy outward report, especially as they look at the large companies, and Group 2 companies might not have the amount of resources or ambition. But to understand that just because it doesn't have to be 40 pages long, you can answer these questions in 22, 28 pages. It's still required for that record keeping because it will have to be available and can be accessed later. So I think it's really important to understand that just because it's not public, the contents still need to be relevant, that you can always look back on them. So thanks for making that point, Sharon. I think sometimes people are getting confused between because it's not public, it's not available, and it's not exactly the case when you look back in time in terms of like acquisitions or mergers or sales.
Yeah, and I should probably also just note that even if you're a private company and you're only lodging this climate report with ASIC, the way it currently works for private companies' financial reports that are lodged with ASIC, anyone can actually go onto ASIC's website and buy a copy of your financial report. And we expect it to be the same for your climate report. So just because you're a private company doesn't necessarily mean that this report might not be able to be seen by your competitors or anyone else who's interested in your company. They just would have to pay to see it. Something else to think about as you're going through the preparation of your report is that you might, probably quite likely, want to refer back next year when you're doing the audit for year 2, you might want to refer back to your working papers that you're preparing this year. So just make sure that you're writing everything down, you're making good records, you're keeping really good working papers and trails of what you're doing so that you've got very clear working papers next year, especially if, a whole year goes by that you're not going to be thinking about climate reporting, then it might be very hard to remember what you did last year. So really good record keeping is going to be super helpful. And then I'll just say thank you to PwC, Deloitte, and EY for their examples that I've got up here on the slide. So these are some examples of some recent public climate reports with independent audit reports that have gone out in external reporting. And one thing I did notice is that all of these reports all have a table in the audit report that makes it very clear exactly which sections of the report have actually been audited and which ones haven't. Now, from an auditor's perspective, you want to make sure, like I said earlier about the expectation gap, you want to be really clear with the reader which bits of the report have been audited and which haven't. And so when you're designing and drafting your climate report, you want to make sure that you're putting the bits that are going to be audited together in a way that can be easily referenced by the auditors. This will just make it much easier for everyone so that the auditors don't have to write a super long reference section. One that I saw that did it quite well, this is Centre Group, an example from Centre Group. So this is just a random page from Centre Group's climate report, page 25. This is a section on their transition risks, it's page 102. They've got a 25-page report altogether. It's included within their annual report. And on this particular page, you can see that the bits that have been audited are actually only the risk and opportunity description, the risk type, and the potential impact. So only the bits that are in the red boxes are the bits that have been audited. But the way that the report has been laid out has made it really easy for the auditors to actually explain what's been audited and what hasn't. So just something to think about as you draft your report.
Not to say it's the most fun exercise to do on a Tuesday, but I recommend after this opening up some reports and actually looking at the auditor's page and then going back to the report and doing that exercise will help you familiarize yourself on how things are structured, and you can interpret if they are clear or not clear. So when you're doing it in your own company, it makes for a cleaner report. We also have a database with all these reports. So if you need to access that, we shared it on the last session. Just let us know, flick me an email, and I'm happy to send you a link. But it's a really good exercise to understand what best practice looks like, or what something that you don't like that are still out there that you can do better in your own company.
Yeah, good advice. All right, so what I thought we'd do next is just jump into the actual audit process and talk a bit about what it will look like and what to expect at each stage of the process. So we'll talk about the planning stage, then the evidence gathering fieldwork stage, and then evaluation and reporting. So to start off on planning, on the left-hand side, I've talked a bit about some of the steps that the auditors will be taking, and on the right, what you can do to prepare. So in terms of the, let's say the starting point for planning, generally your auditors will need to gather background information and build their understanding about your business and your climate impacts. They'll need to review whatever documentation you have available, and will probably want to hold a meeting and ask lots of questions so that they can understand what your business does, your value chain, your reporting boundary, your systems and processes and controls for gathering the information that will end up in your sustainability report, all the sources of data, any major estimation methods that you might be using, and various other types of questions. They will use that data, or all of that understanding, I should say, to inform the rest of their planning. So this will help them decide what types of audit procedures they might be wanting to perform, what they think is material and what's not material. It will help them to come up with their budget. So how many hours they need to spend, how much specialist involvement they might need from their specialist sustainability audit teams, and what the dollar value of the audit might be for your company. It will also help them think about resourcing from their perspective. You know, how many weeks do they need to do the audit? What sort of levels of staff do they need? So that first initial understanding building and data gathering piece is really important to kick off for, just like any project, to make sure that the project is successful throughout. So what can you do? So any relevant information that you already have documented, provide it to them ahead of time so they can review it and ask better questions, really, when you have that meeting with them. And when you do, make sure you have the right people in the room. So you'll invest a little bit of time up front to make sure that the auditors have the best possible understanding across your sustainability work stream, your operations, your procurement, finance, legal, anyone who would have anything to do with the content of the sustainability report. And of course, your consultants, if you're using them. I would say involve your consultants as early as possible, and they can help you make sure that this process is actually, robust and that you're giving the right information to the auditors all the way through. One good way to do this is to do a walkthrough. So when it comes to the process for collating your scope 1 and 2 emissions, you could actually do a step-by-step walkthrough of the processes that you followed. So where did you start? What were the steps you did? Who did you speak to? Where did you get information from? How did you combine that information? What data checks or validations did you do? You could talk through right from end to end through that whole process. Will really help the auditors to think about how they design their audit work to cover those processes. Make sure you document the meeting. You can use your favorite AI tool to create some materials that you can use next time. Remember, audit teams change regularly. It's very uncommon that you'll have the same audit team, the whole team, year on year. You'll probably have 1 or 2 new people every year. So there's going to be a re-education piece every single year. And actually, auditing standards require that you update your knowledge of the business every single year. So whatever materials you produce now will help you in future years. You can just, update it, refresh it every year as you go along. You can also ask the auditors what their materiality is so that you know what sort of numbers they're working towards in terms of their emissions data that you're presenting. If you can, request the budget ahead of time with the audit hours itemized. That's going to do 2 things. One, you can think about whether the audit scope is appropriate. Also, it'll help you to plan and understand how much time your team is going to have to dedicate to this audit. So you can at least have an idea of, how many weeks or where they're going to be focusing their time, how much time they're going to be spending on different elements of the report. So it'll be really helpful for you as well.
I think you mentioned, Sharon, at one point during our pre-meeting is, you're trying to get the best price possible on this engagement. So the more you can, I guess, invest upfront from your team in sharing what you have done, the easier it is to understand what's going to be involved. Because if you come across as like it's messy, you're not quite sure, they already know that it's going to be hard to figure out who did what. That's one thing you told me. And secondly, I guess we see it every day with the carbon accounting, and as we use technologies as an example, is either bring a consultant or a technology partner, request information so you can educate yourself to be able to answer those questions, or have them in there to answer those questions. Because it's really easy to get excited about using platforms and NetNada and putting the data in calculations. But if you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes, it makes it for harder conversations. So whatever provider you use, make sure they're transparent on those decisions. And if you're not documenting, they're documenting on your behalf, and you can request it at that point in time. Because you don't want to do 6 months of engagement and then getting to the auditor and not knowing why things were done a certain way.
Yeah, good advice. And then the next thing I wanted to flag is just the project management. So generally speaking, most companies will use their financial statement auditor to do their climate report audit. And what that means is that time of year is going to be super busy for the auditors, and it's going to be super busy for you and for your organization, because you're going to be going through both sets of audit at the same time. And so project planning is going to become really important. Managing deadlines and milestone dates, managing like deliverables lists, who's going to deliver what by which date, and building in enough time for review by the auditors and potentially rework, or, even just reflection by management is super important. I think having a clear project plan that says who's responsible for providing the draft report to the auditors and when, who will provide the supporting evidence, and maybe you'll have one point person who then collects all the evidence and is the point of communication with the auditors, or maybe you'll have a couple of people. Also agreed turnaround time. So you might say, within 2 or 3 days of an audit request that you'll try and get information back to them, and that the auditors might also commit to giving you turnaround on comments on 2 or 3 days. And also escalation protocols. So especially if you're in like a crunch period, like say you're getting very close to your board meeting where you have to sign off the report, there might be things that you actually need to escalate up the chain on both sides to basically reach agreement on if there are contentious matters. So just agreeing that upfront early is a good idea. I would suggest with the project plan, start from your board sign-off date, map out for each week what needs to be done, and then allocate responsibilities to each person in your team. This will also give the auditors comfort that you guys are going to be, very much organized, and there's not going to be a lot of back and forth or, like Afonso said, sort of messy, wasted time. Build in lots of time for review and for the unexpected, because remember, this is the first time your organization's doing it. It's also the first time the auditors are doing it. So there's going to be new things that crop up all the time that are unexpected, and that's just going to be part of the process. It will get smoother and smoother, once the audit requirements sort of become business as usual. Make sure you get meetings locked in, and I would suggest having at least a bi-weekly project meeting to make sure that you're connecting regularly with the auditors and things are moving along.
Sharon, we have a couple of questions coming through. One is from Ben, which is a very interesting one. What are the signs we should look for that a financial auditor doesn't have the required knowledge to do this work? How can you tell if someone is, not ready to help you out?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think you should probably ask that question up front. If you're having your normal regular audit engagements, which you should be having all year round with your financial auditor, I think asking some questions in that regular catch-up meeting that you have with your financial auditor around their experience in the space, how many other clients they're doing this for, and whether they are whether they're well set up to be able to do the work in the same period that they're doing your financial audit. I think it's worth asking those questions. And then, from there, if you do have concerns, I think I'd be very happy to have a conversation offline about it. You're welcome to reach out to me. I would imagine, though, that, obviously, depending who your financial auditor is, based on the regulatory requirements, most of the financial auditors would be qualified to be doing this work. That's the regulatory framework that exists.
From my perspective, then, by being also on that side, is again, everyone is capable of doing these works, and auditors have consulting teams that are experts in AASB helping their auditing team upskill. You'll have a bad experience if you see that they are not reading through your documentation that you sent across, if they are asking to see some data ahead of time that doesn't really is material for your company. They might be drilling down on refrigerant use while you are professional service companies. You might have some signs if they're misunderstanding the GHG protocol, but it's hard to tell until you are deep in the weeds of it. And as with anything, at the end of the day, it's a project management exercise. And if they're not responsive or they take time or unorganized, it's probably going to be a worse experience more than the knowledge itself. At least in the first years where things like risk and opportunities are not being audited. And so they don't require that level of expertise to begin with. So that's our experience. Sharon, we also have another question in the Q&A, which is the requirements to have the same auditor for your financial statements as AASB S2. This is an option to have. You don't have to. So you can have two different auditors, but what the legislation says is you can have the same one if you choose, and it makes your life easier.
Yeah, that's right. You have the option to have different ones or the same one.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question, Laura. Awesome. Let's continue. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Laura. Really appreciate the questions.
Yes. Okay, so then we'll move into the evidence gathering or field work stage of the audit. So probably three under limited assurance, which is what you'd be having in your year one, there's probably three main things the auditors will be doing. One will be reviewing your draft report. Two will be looking at evidence to support the statements you've made in your report. And number three, they'll be having meetings with management. So doing inquiries with people across the business to corroborate what you've said in your climate report. So in the case of the first one, reviewing your draft report, what you can do to help is actually prepare a disclosure checklist. Now, there's a number of great disclosure checklists out there, and you can use AI to do this. You can make sure that your report is complete and accurate, and actually prepare a disclosure checklist with with a saved file that you can provide to the auditors to show them that mapping between the requirements in S2 and the disclosure you've made in your report. So that will be a nice check for you to do beforehand so that you're comfortable that what you're giving them is already complete and accurate. Then in terms of the actual field work, the evidence that they're going to want to see, I would say as you go through the preparation process, prepare a folder of evidence as you go. Now, if you're using a platform like NetNada, you'd actually have all of your evidence would be stored within the platform and organized in an organized way so that the auditors can find each item. And I know the way NetNada does it is each individual item that you put into the platform is already referenced to the sections of the S2 standard. So you've kind of got that mapping there already. But if you're not using a platform for year one, make sure you've got a folder with a well-organized documentation that you use. So that might be your risk register, your board papers, the schedules you prepared with your emissions data, and make sure that it's well referenced and easy for the auditors to find and understand what's in each document. Remember also, you might need to go back and look at this all next year. So order it well so that you'll be able to use it again, pick it up and remember what was done. Document all your meetings, all your discussions, and all your research that you do. So every time you go and look at ask AI something, or you go and look on Google, or you looking at peer reports to make judgments about things, write that all down, document all the work that you've done, because all of that will help to inform the auditors around the processes that you used and how you built up your evidence base for the judgments that you made. Very important, every time you make a decision or you make a choice, you should document when you made it, you should document it. So don't leave it and go, oh, I'll document that later, because when you have to unpick it later under pressure, that creates stress and it's difficult to do. So rather try and document as you go along.
Just one a practical example there. As you pick, let's say, climate scenarios, you might say it's 1.45 and then 4. Like those decisions that just might happen in a conversation with your consultant or internal team. Led down the track, you're writing the final report and you're trying to figure out, okay, who made this decision? Trying to go to the meeting notes or the emails and finding it out it might be challenging. So when that is made, write it down, like Sharon said, and put it in the document of decisions regarding climate scenarios. So just practical examples of what ends up circling back, 12 months later. It is a pain to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Who made the decision and why? Why? What was the underlying rationale for the decision that you made? Super important. I won't labor the point too much, but the processes that you've gone through are actually really important. Even if they're very manual, very, they're not sort of sophisticated processes, that doesn't matter. Those are the processes that you've used to make sure that the information you're putting in the report is complete and accurate and the right information. So that is actually your evidence of the rigor that you've gone through to prepare the report. So that's all really important. Wherever you've got, more tricky processes, particularly when it comes to the data gathering for the emissions data, I would highly recommend that you write down the process in, very detailed steps enough for someone to actually repeat that process to get to the same answer. That way you'll have a record in case the auditors want it, but also if and when you have to repeat that process, maybe in 6 months' time, maybe in 12 months' time, it actually just makes it easier for everyone. You might not have the same people running the process next year. Include all your checks and balances. So wherever you've done any data validation or any checking back to another source of evidence to corroborate something, wherever you've had, where you've had a review by a senior person in your team or a subject matter expert in the business. So say someone in the business has reviewed something for accuracy, make sure you're documenting all of those things. Those are all controls that help towards the accuracy of your report. Version control, super important, keep versions. And then in terms of liaising with the auditors, ask them for their audit samples as early as possible. Now, typically they will only pick your samples once they will pick their samples. This is like they want to actually check a few of your emissions that you've collated back to source documents. So request those as early as possible once you've finalized your schedules on your side. And also to be aware, usually with your auditors, you'll be providing information both ways through a secure portal, and make sure a couple of people in your team have access to that portal just in case someone has access issues, which can happen from time to time. And then for your meetings with management, request your agendas early so that you can prepare and take notes to build out that standing knowledge base that we talked about in the beginning, because that way you've got more information that you can provide to the auditors next year. And then just a little bit of understanding on audit queries. So the auditors will generally get your information. They'll have comments and queries on it. They usually have a query log where they'll have all their queries maybe in an Excel sheet or in the portal that you use for tracking information requests. That will be, I would suggest you keep a close eye on that as part of your project management, making sure you're resolving those things quickly. You can also ask the auditors for a prioritization, so you can tell exactly which ones are actually the showstoppers versus just the sort of more run-of-the-mill, maybe less important comments, so that way you can focus on the big ones first. And I would also suggest you have regular meetings rather than emails back and forth. That will just help you cut out a lot of the time of, of sort of wasted back and forth on things. You can also expect some comments from the auditors on improvements to your report. So they might not be things that you have to do. They're not things that would suggest that your report's not compliant, but they'll be helpful things because the auditors are looking at lots of reports right now. So they'll have a really good sense of what good looks like, and they'll probably give you some recommendations of things to do to improve your report, which is always helpful. Then the auditors will go away and form their opinion, right? And they'll conclude on whether they're comfortable to provide a clean opinion or whether they're going to include some qualifications. Now, if there is going to be a qualification, you want to know about that super early on. So as you're getting close towards finalizing the fieldwork, you definitely want to ask them if there are any showstoppers and make sure that you're aware of any issues that they're not comfortable with. Communication, super, super important. And then reporting, the auditors will prepare that audit report that we saw some examples earlier on. That's what they'll be presenting to the board. In their sign-off to the board, they will also be providing a view on the company's process for the sustainability report, and they'll probably make some recommendations for improvements to controls and processes for next year. Again, super helpful. I would just suggest that you ask to see those recommendations before the board meeting. That way you can be prepared and you can have a view on those recommendations, which ones you think would be best to implement, which ones might be put off for later. Just helps you to be a bit more on the front foot with that. Any questions there?
You mentioned just at one point in terms of getting comments from your auditor. As a sustainability professional, you might have to present to the board or your boss, and you gave me a kind of a tip on the pre-session. Can you just talk about the terms of the timing of those comments and how that works, so you make sure you do your job correctly in front of your team?
Yeah, I would say if you're meeting with the audit team regularly, you're going to already have a really good sense of what the sticky issues were in the audit. What were the things where you had to have some back and forth, or where the auditors really probed you or challenged something. And those are probably going to be the areas that they're going to talk to the board about. So you'll have a good sense as you go through. But of course, like I said, communication with the auditors and building your relationship with them, having those regular meetings, getting an early sense of them, of what are the types of recommendations that they might make to the board. And that can be done throughout, but it will probably really solidify in the last week or two before.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Before your board meeting, yeah. So just as a rule of thumb, when you're thinking about the type of evidence that you're going to be providing to the auditors, so these are just some high-level thoughts. So third-party evidence is better than internal evidence. So that means if you have actual emissions data that's coming from your electricity provider in the form of a statement from your an invoice or statement from your electricity provider, that's going to be better than a schedule that you've created and provided to the auditors, right? They want to see that actual third-party evidence. Documented evidence is better than verbal. So just making a statement in a meeting, generally you want to back that up with some documentary evidence. And also things like saying, well, the CFO reviewed this, that's fine. But if you actually have some documented evidence that the CFO reviewed it, like maybe you sent an email to him, he sent an email back saying, I've reviewed this, here are my 3 comments, that's going to be much better evidence than you just saying the CFO reviewed it. And then on my next point, some evidence that's actually been reviewed by an appropriate senior person, and that you have some evidence of that review chain, super important. Verifiability, make sure you can corroborate it. If the information that you use to prepare the report is actually contradictory, so you might have some information that suggests, maybe you might be quite prone to heat stress in your business, and other information that suggests you're not. You want to have all that information and be able to show that you've come up with a balanced judgment. So you don't want to only show the evidence that supports your view. You want to show both the contradictory information and also be really open about any gaps or limitations that you had. At the end of the day, you've made a judgment and you've done that to your best ability. The auditors can challenge that, but the best foot that you can put forward is to actually produce all the information that you used in making that judgment. Recent information is generally going to be better than older information, so make sure you've got the most recent information that you can, and then set out your working papers and your memos super clearly and understandably. That will just save everyone's time. Forward-looking statements, you might be tempted to put forward-looking statements into your sustainability report. If you have, very reasonable grounds to do so, that might be appropriate, but you might actually just want to avoid them altogether because they can be very hard to substantiate.
Sharon, we have one question coming through: is if we can provide the auditors with the samples that we want them to audit, if you can actually be the one sending through.
No. So audit standards require that the auditor can decide what the scope is, and that includes what samples they choose. So they're definitely going to be the ones that decide what to test, how much to test, which individual items to test.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's part of their independence. I've included in here a list of examples of audit evidence that you might provide. This is just based on clients that I've been working with. These are the types of things that we've been providing to the auditors. You don't have to have all of them, but that just gives you an idea of some of the things the auditors might request. And we're going to share this pack afterwards, so you don't need to write them down or anything now. You can refer back to them. Last point I just wanted to check. So, and I think we've got a poll on this, right, Afonso?
Yeah, with 5 minutes to go. Hopefully everyone still has energies to answer correctly.
One more poll. Does S2 create new governance requirements for companies and directors?
I just launched the poll. It's I didn't include the answer straight away, Sharon, because your options had like the answer in it. But it's a really, really interesting, tricky question, I'd say.
Right.
Okay, answers coming through. Perfect. We have 4 minutes to go, Sharon, just being aware of time. So we have enough time for everyone to thank you and do a round of applause.
Okay.
Perfect. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. We have a 50-50 coming through.
50-50. Okay.
Yeah. All
cool.
right.
So yes, it was a trick question. S2 does not create any new governance requirements. However, the Corporations Act and RG 280 that goes alongside it does create new governance requirements. So like the real answer is there are new governance requirements, yes. They're not created by S2. S2 is all about reporting and disclosure, but actually underneath that sits the Corporations Act, which does actually create these new governance requirements. So I've put a bit of information here about what governance actually means. At the end of the day, the directors are accountable for the governance of a company, and that includes governance over sustainability risks and opportunities. So you can refer to this if your directors are not aware of these new requirements. Probably a good idea to make them aware of it. I've included in the pack here the specific requirements that directors should be aware of when it comes to their obligations under the Corporations Act, specific to sustainability reports, and also the record-keeping requirements that are actually the compliance requirements under the Corporations Act for sustainability. So I'll wrap up there and just say, there's lots of ways that we can help you to get ready for this process. No matter where you are in your particular sustainability reporting process, if you need some help, I'm sure we can help you. We're doing a lot of board and management education sessions, stakeholder engagement, helping you with your stakeholder engagement to bring together all the people that you need to in your organization and also your auditors. We can help with the project management. We understand the audit process and the climate reporting process. And so we can really help you do that in a good managed way. Report preparation, of course, audit support, even things like if you're trying to build a business case for additional resources in your sustainability function, alongside data collection, emissions analysis, etc.
So this is why you need 22 years, because it is complex. There's a lot of fine lines in the auditing and the legislation. And I think we wouldn't be possible without people like yourself, Sharon, leading the ship in a sense. If anyone has any other questions for Sharon or myself, feel free to email, and I'm happy to connect everyone. Like I mentioned, us and Sharon work very closely together supporting clients. And I think this is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because it's all good to go and do emission management and governance, but understanding the audit process where you'll spend a lot of time, it's super, super important, as well as the governance and setting up the right systems and processes. Sharon, anything else you wanna say?
No, I think I've talked enough, but I really look forward to hearing from some of you. So yeah, please reach out. Happy to chat on any questions you have.
Fantastic. Enjoy your Tuesday, and hopefully, spending a lunchtime learning about auditing insurance was as more exciting as you thought it was going to be. Thank you so much. Phenomenal work, Sharon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.